Hello, and welcome to today's conversation on the future of voice. I'm Bennett Richardson, General Manager at Protocol. Thank you for joining us. At Protocol, we aim to arm you as business decision makers in technology, business, and policy with the actionable news and analysis that you need to help you do your job. Today, we're going to talk about voice. From speakers to phones to cars, voice control has quickly become ubiquitous. And today, we'll take a look at what the future holds. What kind of new business models are emerging in a voice-first world? What voice-powered experiences may come out of the entertainment industry? And how will voice control evolve in a world with multiple virtual assistants? We've assembled a panel of experts from across the industry to discuss what's next for voice. Hope you will join the conversation by tweeting your questions using our hashtag #ProtocolNextUp. And if you're not already subscribed, don't forget to subscribe to Protocol's family of newsletters at protocol.com/newsletters. Now, let's get to it. I'm excited to introduce our moderator, Janko Roettgers, Protocol Senior Reporter and author of the Protocol Next Up newsletter, to introduce our panel. Janko, take it away.
Thanks, Bennett. Thanks for this introduction, and thanks everybody for joining us to Protocol's Future of Voice panel today. I'm very excited, especially for our panelists today, 3 experts from the world of voice. And in a first, they are joining us from 3 different areas of the world, 3 continents. I think it's a first for a Protocol event anyway. But it's also sort of fitting because they're sort of touching 3 very different areas of this voice-first world. We have somebody from a device maker, we have somebody from a media service, and somebody working on voice experiences and narratives here. Together, we will be looking at the current state of voice, the future of voice, and how we get to that future. But you're really here to hear from them and not from me, so I want to hand it over as quickly as possible to the panel. And to kick things off, I would like to ask each and every one of you, spend just 3-4 sentences to briefly tell us who you are, who you're working for, and what your role there is. And Ananya, let's kick things off with you. I'm going to do this alphabetically today.
Sure, nice to be on this panel, and welcome to everyone. I am Ananya Sharon. I am product manager at Pandora SiriusXM. I lead our voice efforts across the company with a focus on our in-app voice assistant. For those of you familiar with Pandora or our Pandora users, we have a feature called Voice Mode, which is the native voice assistant. And the goal of Voice Mode is to make music discovery and controlling listening experience really conversational, natural, and most importantly, personalized for our listeners. Pandora has a rich source of information and our listening tastes on all our users. And we really want to bring that in an effortless, frictionless way to the forefront. And Voice Mode was really conceived and launched to bring those experiences to our users. So very happy to be here and would love to discuss more as we progress with this panel.
All right, thanks, Ananya. Let's next go to you, Joe, joining us from Paris today, in the evening there right now. But Joe, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing at Sonos. And it sounds like Joe may be muted. So we will give it another try.
Okay.
There we go. Future of voice.
Cool. So it's better that way. Hello, everyone. Super happy to be here. Looking forward to this conversation. My name is Joseph Duro. I'm the VP of Voice Experience at Sonos. So basically, as simple as it gets, my job is to see how voice can help our customers better enjoy music and access content on our system. So I'm quite fortunate that I work in a company that has a very wide control surface with our users. People can use devices themselves and buttons, if that's the most straightforward way. There's voice, and we have 2 voice assistants working today on the Sonos system, and there's the app. And also, those are only a subset of the ways you can control your Sonos system. You have direct control and many others. So that's like that freedom and flexibility in the ways you can use the system to make it as easy as possible. And that's where we play to the voice effort. And something that's very important to us, just to give an example, as I said, freedom of choice is about choosing the content that you want to play. We have over 100 services that you can play from on Sonos. We actually see voice assistants the same way. And we actually think that you should be able to switch from one assistant to the other from one product. And you shouldn't have to buy two Sonos products to use two assistants. And we've shown it's possible. And that's something that's dear to our hearts. So that's the kind of things I work on.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And before we go into all those details, let's also bring in Zach, for whom it is the early morning now. So Zach, tell us a little bit about you and your company.
Thanks, Janko. I'm literally the future of voice today because I'm speaking to you from tomorrow. It's Friday morning here for me. I started Xandra as a conversation design studio 5 years ago to really leverage conversational interfaces to create much more immersive and engaging entertainment experiences. And over the past 5 years, we've been very fortunate to collaborate with some of the biggest technology companies like Amazon and Google, and media and entertainment companies like HBO and Sesame Street and Nickelodeon, etc. We're best known for some of the very expansive Alexa skills like Westworld. We're about to launch a new one in collaboration with Google and AMC with the Walking Dead universe, which I'm very excited about. More recently, though, and what started as a collaboration during the pandemic in 2020, and also in response to our partners looking for more multimodal experiences, we started working with a motion design studio called Breeder, based in Australia. And we've now subsequently merged together. So now Xandra has the multimodal capabilities in-house, which is super exciting. And I'm also working with Breeder's parent company, which is a venture studio. And they've got multiple ventures all across the world. They've got offices in LA and Australia. And my role there is really setting the strategy as head of narrative for the future of storytelling. So that's bringing like voice conversational interfaces and these multimodal immersive entertainment experiences all together kind of under one umbrella.
So just during this introductory round, we touched on a lot of things already that we want to dive in deeper today, which is future of voice, multimodal interactive experiences, multi-assistant worlds, and then also just, sorry about that, just the presence of voice assistants with two dominant assistants obviously out there, Google and Amazon, and also how companies navigate that. And I want to dive in a little bit deeper on that subject. Let's start things off, maybe go back to Ananya a little bit. And you touched on this a little bit already, that Pandora decided to launch its own voice assistant for mobile a couple of years ago. Tell us a little bit about why that was important to you and why you didn't just want to rely on third-party assistants.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned, we were already integrated on all of these smart speakers, and people could enjoy their Pandora stations on Google Home and Alexa and everywhere else. However, we wanted to bring, first of all, our rich personalization and all of our rich internal data on music. Pandora is known for its Music Genome Project. And really, we could only do that in the in-app voice assistant. Plus, we wanted the freedom of being with the user everywhere they go. And our listeners have been telling us they wanted consistent touch points across all of their voice interactions. So not just smart speakers, but also their phones. So really, we want to bring that experience to the forefront. And we conceived of it as a friend that really knows you and your music tastes and can live in your pocket and would give you the best personalized recommendations. So that was really the impetus for us to launch the in-app voice assistant.
And Joe, that must sound a little familiar to you, because at Snips you develop your own assistant as well. And I think you brought over some of that work to Sonos. How do you think these days, maybe also just from a personal perspective, about general purpose assistants versus specialized assistants and custom solutions, I guess?
Yeah, I think so. Specialized assistants, it's only the beginning, right? I think what we know and what everyone is familiar with is the big ones that have basically a very broad promise. But what we see in their adoption is that there's somehow a saturation for people who either don't find them reliable enough, or useful enough, or trustable enough. So that saturation that you observe is something that potentially you can compensate in a different way. And I think specialized assistants are going to tackle that. actually, I think in an experience, and Ananya touched on that, there's so much depth that you can get to in terms of using your knowledge about the user, using the context, using the past of your conversation with the user. That's something that's super hard to implement well when you're trying to do everything. So I think people don't have a demand for a ton of usages of voice, but actually you want it better. So specialized assistants are actually a way to tackle that. So focus laser on given use cases and use context, use continuity of conversation as much as possible. And that flexibility and adaptability to the user is really what's going to differentiate and potentially get us past that saturation and that lack of trust as well. And maybe specialized assistants maybe need less data to do their job better. So I think that's the kind of options and questions we have on this topic.
That's interesting that you would bring up a saturation with voice assistants. Kind of maybe a good point for us to take stock, and I would love to open this up to everybody and kind of get a sense of where we are at with voice usage these days. What kind of trends are you seeing both on Sonos speakers, with the experiences that you're making at Xandra, Zach, and also for Pandora? Like, are we seeing still a lot of growth in that field? Are we seeing people getting sort of fatigued a little bit? Are they sticking to what they know? What is each and everybody of you seeing as the current usage patterns for voice? And whoever wants to go first for this one.
I'm happy to jump in, but my use case might be a bit of an outlier because we build voice experiences around largely known IP, and mostly IP that people are already very familiar with and love and kind of actively seek out new ways of engaging. So in the experiences that we build, we're pretty consistently seeing kind of increased session times, increased session numbers, increased kind of repeat engagement over multiple sessions. But again, these are brand like SpongeBob and shows like Westworld, and now with The Walking Dead coming out, where people are just hungry for experiencing those types of worlds and those characters in different and deeper and more meaningful ways. One trend that I have been seeing and hearing from some of the big device players in the interactive space is around the multimodal. So Amazon and Google are both pushing hard their screen-based devices and trying to find ways to incorporate visual elements into the voice experience.
And before we get to the details of the multimodal experiences, I would just like to get your general sense. Do you feel like people are getting more comfortable with voice usage? Was there a learning curve initially, and now people are pretty much on board, and you can get more complex as you build these experiences? What's your experience there?
Is that for me?
Yeah, sure. But just as a quick follow-up, sorry.
Yeah. I think, the hype cycle is still, we're still kind of like nearing the top of it. People are still trying to figure out how best to use these things. I think the level of comfort with voice is relatively high, and Siri's been around for a very long time, as has Alexa and others. And so, and also the increase in usage amongst families with kids driving a lot of adoption as well, and then parents seeing how kids are using it and then kind of adjusting some of their behavior. So we're still, I think in terms of like normalizing voice, I think we've come a long way, but then like actually finding the right use cases to map to that normalized experience is still something that we're working on as an industry.
Joe, I think Sonos released the first voice speaker 4 years ago, something like that. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, 4 years ago.
So what have you seen in terms of growth of usage and usage patterns? Are people still jumping onto this? Are they getting a little tired of it? How does it play out on the device maker front?
We actually see a lot of stability. So the adoption of voice on Sonos has been quite polarized. So what's interesting is, we sell speakers and very often they have microphones. And what's interesting to see is that the activation of voice on devices that have microphones is not systematic. And you actually have 50-50 in terms of households that activate voice on their Sonos products that have microphones versus the ones who don't. So that's super interesting to us, right? And that's stable over time. So no upwards, no downwards trend, that's stable. And also the nature of the engagement, how much people use voice on those speakers, that's stable as well over time. And that's very polarized. As I say, like 50% of people who reject voice and don't activate it, but the ones who use it, they use it a ton. And people, typically the ones who use voice, they have between 25% and 50% of the content they play that they activate through voice. So for people who get it and adopt it, it becomes a primary modality. So yeah, that's pretty stable over time. And of course, that's what every survey and panel says. Listening and controlling music is the #1 use case for voice. And maybe that's why we see that stability on the Sonos ecosystem, that angles may vary on other platforms and other use cases.
Ananya, how does that play out for Pandora? Do you see some of the same patterns?
So mostly agree with all of that. I do think that it's still nascent. Like people are getting more comfortable even from the time that voice mode first launched, which is 2 years ago now. And even before, it was so new and there was hesitation and misgivings around privacy about what is the phone hearing versus what it's not. But I think the more the industry is, everyone's adopting it. Like it's not even just smart speakers, cars, and phone assistants anymore. The fridges have it. I've heard toilets have it, which I don't know if it's a true thing, but I know that somebody high up in my company definitely has that. He's way ahead of the adoption curve. So I think it's becoming more normalized, but there is still a lot of room to grow. And at least in Pandora, like when we built it, we knew that people were going to use it mostly for playing their stations and playing specific songs. But where it can truly delight and differentiate is people asking open-ended things or saying things like, play me something for relaxing or play me something different, which don't specify a particular song or station. So those moments really delight. However, the primary use case is still search and play. So I think that is driven by the industry-wide usage of how people use YouTube or other media services, which is, look for something specific and then play it. But that's what I'm hoping that it moves towards more of these ambiguous conversational use cases and context, because that's where the power of voice really is. And kids, yes, I have a 5-year-old son in my house who uses the HomePod like a pro. And he knows when to say Google and when to say Pandora and when to say Siri. So these things are so natural, you don't even have to teach the kids. And it's an entertainment tool. And it's an educational tool for him. And, sometimes I worry whether I should be drawing hard boundaries on technology adoption, but it's really delightful when he can ask Siri to spell a word for him and he learns that way. So I think that's just going to grow, and more maybe the lag is from the older generation, but for the younger generation is just so natural.
So is it just a generational thing then, or are there things that the industry could do to get these 50% of voice rejectors to jump on board and maybe also become more open to going beyond just asking for the weather or the time? Is there something that device makers could do, that platform operators could do, or even people who make services, to kind of get people more open-minded about voice, more accepting of voice?
I'll chime in with my thoughts, and I would...
No, you go first, Ananya.
Okay, and then, would love to hear from the other panelists. So I was going to say that it's hard to force behavior, right? Especially in terms of every service that has a voice assistant does multi-channel education. They educate on the experience itself. There are accompanying emails, there are push notifications of these are the things you can try. In context education, these are all things that services and products can try to do. However, we have to accept that a lot of this behavior is just going to be organic. And there will be the early adopters and the laggards. That's to be expected. But we, as innovators in this field, should think about what's going to be the trends 5 years ahead. And one of the ways, which you brought up as well, the voice fatigue, conversation is a really interesting one for me. And trying to figure out what the right balance of conversation to really extract a user's intent versus now it's just getting annoying because I don't want to hear all of this and I just want to get to play music. Been running several experiments with that. Can't say I have the best answer yet. Conversation seems suited to particular use cases, but over talking and forcing it on the user is perhaps not the best experience. So that'll be interesting to see. So matching conversation with multimodal experiences and understanding in which cases the user wants to talk more versus just give the information and go quiet is the best approach.
Zach, you want to chime in as well?
Yeah, I agree with everything Ananya said. And beyond multimodal, also just focusing on the individual mode, the single mode, and making sure that you're applying the right use case to the right circumstance and even device. So a couple of examples, when we were working with Sesame Street and developing an Alexa game for 3-year-olds, during user testing, we wanted to make sure that the kids were comfortable interacting with the device. And so they actually put a plush toy head on top of the Alexa device. So they weren't talking to a computer or a speaker, they were talking to a character. And that just kind of helped like disarm them. Another thing, maybe on kind of on the other end of the adoption spectrum, is we worked with Google for quite a long time developing a project that's rolled out now in India, Indonesia, the United States, and a couple of other countries. And essentially it allows people to access Google Assistant on a landline or a non-smartphone. And so basically that's part of their Next Billion User initiative, where you've got these people in countries that have high cellular network availability, but very, very low internet bandwidth, or just because of like finances, just not access to devices that have access to the internet. And so being able to see the types of use cases that people who are calling on a landline and talking to a voice assistant, it was really remarkable. And it goes well beyond, like in some cases, that's like their link to the world. And so then it becomes both utilitarian and conversational at the same time.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Joe, I'm interested from your perspective, though, too, as a device maker. Do you think that's it? Is it do we need technical solutions? Do we need to make these platforms more widely available? Do we need to make them look cuter? Or is it also about like dispelling myths around privacy, or even addressing this more openly? What are your thoughts on getting this other 50% on board?
Well, I think part of it is about reliability, just like making sure that when you want to do something, you get it done. So something we track and we ask our users is how often you just try to do something with voice and end up giving up and using your phone. And those numbers are actually quite high. So that tells you about the frustration of people not identifying the right use cases, the scope of the assistant, and also just the thing doesn't understand them. So the state of the technology, maybe because it tries to do too much, well, doesn't live to the expectations of people. So that's one side. But if you actually ask people who choose not to activate voice on a Sonos system, the number one reason they give is privacy. So I think there's a lot of things we can do on that front. I think from a user's perspective, it's pretty simple. They want to make sure that no one is going to listen to their private conversations. And we've talked a lot about people labeling users' recordings. And we've heard a lot about that, a lot of scandals. How much that is done and forever. If you ask people, I don't think a lot of people are convinced that this is not happening to their recordings, right? So because it goes to the cloud, and then the message is complicated. And then if you look at the TNCs, it's about if you want it to work better for you, then you need to give away your data. So that kind of trade-off between performance and privacy, in the sense like complex messages. I think it's about technology, yes, but then transparency and simplicity. Sometimes you see the field going towards complicated technology like federated learning on the Google side or differential privacy on the Apple side. That's very convincing from a technical perspective. No one understands what that means if you just talk to the layman in the street, right? So I think it's important that we mature that technology and that ecosystem to actually provide solutions that you can trust and just activate the thing in your living room, knowing that no one is going to listen to you. And until we get there, I think there's going to be that glass ceiling in a way.
It seems to me that there's also maybe almost conflicting ways to address this, right? Because on the one hand, if you make voice assistants easier, you're running more into privacy issues. There's been some talk from Google and other companies about being more flexible around wake words, right? Where you don't have to invoke it every single time. And I know Amazon has also said they've done some research on maybe even invoking it after you say something. So it's more, you're in a conversation with somebody else and then you say Alexa, and then give Alexa permission to basically go back and re-listen to what you just said. But at the same time, for somebody who's really conscious about their privacy, this might be the wrong approach, right? So how do you walk that balance between innovating the technology and then at the same time being conscious of those privacy issues?
If I can follow up on that, I think, well, Amazon gave a beginning of an answer at the beginning of the year when they actually advertised two things at the same time. They advertised this conversational mode coming this year, and at the same time, they pushed on some of their new Echo devices on device processing. So if you listen more, but if you listen locally, actually, you resolve that tension between making it easier and potential privacy issues. But then it's only on part of their devices. So the message is complicated from a user's perspective, but I find that kind of solutions very interesting.
Zach and Ananya, do you have thoughts on that subject?
Yeah, this is an interesting one and something we constantly try to keep on the top of. I talk to our legal counsel all the time. One way is to make it really transparent for the user within the app, especially as they get onboarded and they're prompted to grant my permissions. It's important to lay out all of the details. Some may read it, some might not, but the option should always exist. And providing within the app, again, the option to turn it off and on. It's ultimately for the user to design. And I think this is also something that's early stages of adoption. Some users who want, want to grant permissions, like, because they know they'll get a better product at the end of it or a better experience, they lead the way and the rest follow. So, for example, detecting user frustration is something that we've tried at our end. And the way we've done it is by trying to see if the user made repeated requests in a small amount of time. But really, it is a secondary signal. The real signal would be listening to the user's audio and then detecting whether they're angry or sad or whatever, like something that needs to be mitigated. But the user has to grant permission, and achieving an optimal solution in this case becomes hard. So I think in terms of getting the landscape to reach level of maturity where everything is clear and transparent, the laws around privacy and listening are well documented and adopted, we have to lean on the user and let them make the choices of when they want to share their data versus when they don't. One thing that Google Home launched recently is not having to say "Hey Google" for the most common queries that they get. And I really liked it because I ask Google 10 times a day, what time is it? And I don't want to say, "Hey Google" every time. So then that's set up as its own specific wake phrase, which the user can turn off or on. So I like that the choice is with the user and they get to decide. So that's the most important thing for me, is to give the control to them.
Zach, how does bringing multimodal interfaces change some of that too, because you can be maybe more obvious about what's going on if you have a screen too, right? So does it make things easier in a way?
Well, so I've got a couple of thoughts on that in two different categories. One, just to follow on what the other panelists are saying. We basically defer to the technologies that we're publishing to in terms of how they manage privacy and how they put the controls into the hands of their users. And so when we're building an experience for kids, for example, we have to adhere to Amazon's policy. And if we're building something that's more like adult content, like The Walking Dead or things like that, making sure that it's explicit, like that this is adult content, and kind of going through the normal warnings. And then if there's any parts of the experience that require some form of personalized interaction, so whether it's a notification or something else, we deal with those companies' account linking capabilities. So you have to give explicit permission to be able to link to your Amazon account or your Google account when you're doing that. In terms of like the multi-assistant and multimodal stuff, the specialized assistant and multimodal stuff, I wanted to come back to that for a minute, because I think a lot of that is very similar to what we were seeing with the personalized portals in the late 90s and 2000s, where it's kind of a singular view of all of the information that you're looking for. But that singular view consists of a whole bunch of different services that you've had to go through the process to link up and to authenticate and to accept whatever terms and conditions for each individual box on that portal page. And it's a bit of a hassle to set up initially, but then once it's set up, it makes things very easy because you've got that kind of singular view into all these different services. And so the voice assistants now, and particularly the ones with the screen, it gives you, it's almost like the dashboard of your day, and the ability to interact with that dashboard makes things a much more seamless process, even if it's a little bit more cumbersome right now to set it up.
And how does it change then also, maybe we can also add talk a little bit about the experiences themselves. And Zach, I want to give you a little bit of a chance to talk about the Walking Dead project too, because I think that hasn't actually been talked about a whole lot yet, or maybe not even officially announced yet. So maybe can you tell us a little bit, give a little bit of a preview how that even is going to look like and how that's going to push the envelope on those fronts?
Yeah, we've been using a bunch of different game mechanics and conversation design techniques in a variety of the experiences that we've developed over the last years. And I think Walking Dead is a great example of the culmination of a lot of that stuff. So we've been working really closely. We've basically licensed the Walking Dead IP from AMC, and we've created a whole new storyline within the Walking Dead universe. It's a Google action called Walking Dead Pathways. It's been submitted for certification, but it hasn't launched yet. So this is actually the first time that anybody's talking about it. But in terms of the type of experience, you're trying to guide a small team, which you hand pick at the beginning of the experience, through a series of challenges that determine whether or not you and your team make it to safety. Safety as being like the base camp in Alexandria, or you befall some kind of horrible fate, including getting eaten by zombies, obviously. And so we've used a lot of the learnings from, for example, Westworld, which is, at the time Westworld was launched, which won the Grand Prix at Cannes in 2019. It was kind of the most immersive and expansive voice experience. In terms of final recorded audio, The Walking Dead Pathways is twice as long. So it's a game that you can really immerse yourself in if you're a Walking Dead fan, and there are a lot of them. Being able to literally spend hours feeling like you're a part, like you're in that Walking Dead world, and the associated sounds and ambient noises and characters that you know about are kind of all around you. It's just like a really compelling experience. The screen-based devices make it even more compelling in that we've been able to commission custom illustrations for pretty much every single frame of the experience. And so it's not just the voice interaction and all the sounds that you hear, it's also the visuals that come in at the appropriate times in the experience. So it's really kind of brought together a lot of the stuff that we've learned around best practice and script design for voice, and just the kind of the general feel of how a seamless audio-driven game should look like.
So it seems like we have a lot of these things coming up now, interactive voice experiences like the ones that you just described, or games. People are also obviously interested in live voice, a lot more, Clubhouse and so forth. And then just the general podcast boom, which is basically an older medium, but it's sort of getting a resurgence just through the pandemic as well. I'm wondering how much that matters for acceptance of voice, and how much that matters to a company like Sonos, for example, too. So.
Yeah, what I find interesting with these new types of content is you actually consume them in a different way. So typically, when you want to listen to music, you have to find the doors to that content, and in your memory, the door is the name of the artist or the name of that track or the lyrics of that song. For a podcast, well, it's going to be different, right? It's going to be the topic, the chain, and something that's very interesting that the BBC is working on is, how you can jump from one content to the other, so that like that path, and making sure that the content you're getting is relevant not only to the query you're making, but to what you just listened to and the things you listened in the past, and has the right level of length and also of complexity compared to what they know about you. So that's the kind of things that, I think it's only the beginning, and there's going to be, as we said, like being specialized allows you to actually go deep in that direction and make that enjoyable. And also that's the kind of content, very simply, that's you don't repeat right over time. It's very different from a song or top tracks of an album. So making sure that you have that history about the user and just like start at the right moment, whatever the touch point, that's also very important. So that's the kind of things that these new kinds of content raises as questions for people like us.
And Pandora has a lot of podcasts too. So how much does that play a role? How much does discovery, how big of a challenge is it, I guess, when you get to different new kinds of content or different kinds of content other than music?
Yeah, podcast discovery is kind of a unique thing because I don't think anyone's truly figured it out yet. There's a lot of word of mouth. People follow personalities, and it's some of the well-known podcasts that have wide listenership are easier to understand the themes or the topics within it. And then once you understand the themes and topics, they're to build a recommendation system around it. But for all of the long tail content or podcasts where the topic changes from week to week, those are a little bit harder to figure out. But in terms of what voice can do to enable podcast discovery is understand, as Joe was mentioning, the door to music is artist or lyrics or tracks. Those are the most common ones we see as well. So to understand how people discover podcasts in the real world, and then figuring out what the intents and utterances are to accompany that in a voice interface, and really enabling those in a reliable way, that's really key. So that's something I'm actively working on, and even going beyond podcasts to live content or news or sports scores. These are all brand new things, and figuring out the right thing to do or right thing to pick, disambiguation, taking the user's context into account, taking their listening history. The signals are different and the use cases are different. So we need to figure out how to build a system that leverages both of those things. Another thing for music is to just keep an eye out for emerging trends and how they play out in this voice interface world. Through social media, especially through the pandemic, people find a lot of a sense of connection and personalization in an online world. And people want to connect, have one-to-one connection with the creator and the artist. I think voice is amazing for that. Like, yes, Clubhouse exists. I know other competitors are also building their voice-only interactive experiences, but just so magical for music, Pandora already does some of that, but it's kind of one way. We want to figure out ways to make it two-way. So from the fan to the creator and make it just feel really meaningful and a one-to-one connection. And I think voice is perfect for that.
All right, I want to talk about
some water here. Yeah.
one or two more subjects really quick that are sort of looking forward at the future of voice, and one of them is very specific to Sonos, which is the multi-assistant world. Sonos has two assistants running on the devices, not concurrently, due to policy reasons. And now, Joe, you're not legal experts. I'm not going to ask you any questions about any of those things right now. But I know that Sonos has been public about that you have built a solution that would allow multiple assistants to run at the same time. Tell us a little bit about how that would work, or how that should work in an ideal world with multiple assistants, maybe with different purposes.
Yeah. Well, the example you're taking is the one of two Ask Anything assistants. So I think in that case, well, you have like fundamental privacy questions that you want to ensure. So typically when you're talking to one assistant, you don't want the other one to listen. So that's kind of the basics. But if you want to implement this kind of concurrency situations, you want to be very careful about that, so that as Ananya said, right, you want the user to be in control of what's happening. So if they choose to talk to one, well, they're in a conversation with one, and the other should not be listening. So that's the kind of fundamental things you need to implement. In that case, because it's two assistants that can do anything, then it's important that for any object for which they have a shared responsibility, and in that case, typically the Sonos device itself, it's important that they communicate about the state of things. So when one of them changes the state has to be propagated to the other, either through direct communication between the assistants, or maybe the best way is for the object, so that when the object gets modified by one assistant, it broadcasts its state to all the others. So that's one aspect. But something that you hear a lot, a question that comes a lot when you look at more forward-looking questions that the Voice Interoperability Initiative is looking at, is like typically handover. Because if you have multiple assistants, at some point, if you have specialized assistants in the mix, then they cannot all do everything. And something that the initiative is looking at is handoff. So assistant A gets summoned and has something, and that's not what he can do. Then ideally they would be able to say, okay, go to that assistant or directly trigger the other one. But that really, that gets complicated pretty quickly, because if you have two specialized assistants, there's one reason they're specialized, is that you put all the energy in that. And if you're asking something from another topic to assistant A, it's super hard to know that this is actually in the scope of assistant B. So that's the kind of technical limitations you run into pretty quickly. But that's science fiction at this stage, because you don't have enough specialized assistants. But if we move forward in that direction, that's the kind of things that we're going to have to solve. And as Zach was saying, on the graphical interface, you have icons and you very clearly go to one or the other. Here it's all mixed, and the mental model of the user gets crowded. So that gets complicated. So I don't know if there wouldn't be like some sort of saturation at some point in terms of a UX or mental model in terms of multiplying the assistants. So there's a limit in someone's brain.
It's like too many people are answering your question at the same time at some point. Yeah. Zach, I know you are also, as you're looking forward and looking at what's next, very excited about future surfaces, future interfaces and devices. And what are the things that you're looking to, what kind of technologies are you excited about these days? And I think you're muted.
I am. I have a bird in the background. I'm really excited about the augmented audio, augmented reality and virtual reality in general. Janko, you just had a piece in today's newsletter on Facebook's Ray-Ban collaboration. There have been lots of experiments in that, and we're still trying to figure out what the best use case of that is. Before I kind of talk about where we think things are heading, I just wanted to comment on the kind of the multi-assistant thing. So I think what we want to get to as users, as consumers of these things, is kind of like a Jarvis situation, where you're not saying, like, hey, Alexa, ask Pandora to ask Sonos to play Lord on my Sonos One, right? You're just saying, hey, Jarvis, play Lord. And in the background, there's this kind of brokerage and maybe even some AI that's figuring out which of these things that you've already connected with, which of these devices you already have, which of these things you're already using, all of that stuff, and then figuring it out in the background and serving it up to you. So that's kind of where we want to get to. But as Joseph said, it's not exactly science fiction, but it's still like a few years out. The thing that is really driving us, so right now, one of the projects we're working on is virtual reality that has like very deep tactical elements, tactile rather, I should say. So we've got we're telling a story in virtual reality, but as you move through that story, it's in a physical location, and you're experiencing the physical elements. So whether you're picking up a torch or crossing a rope bridge, that is a physical torch that you're picking up, and it's an actual rope bridge that you're crossing, combined with all of the photorealistic elements and even atmospheric elements like wind blowing on your face, things like that. Where I want to take that to next is incorporating voice interaction into that. And so it's basically kind of the voice multiverse, where you're in AR, you're in VR, and not only can you talk to the other humans who are in that VR environment with you, but you can talk to the other avatars who might even be like digital avatars or like non-playing characters. So there's been a lot of work done on a research level around generative content and voice models that allow you to basically, in my mind, basically build a video game as you're playing. Like the video game builds yourself as you're playing it, and your voice is one of the ways that you're interacting with that world that's then constructing itself.
That sounds super interesting. Definitely something to look forward to. Ananya, I want to give you a chance to maybe close us out and give us sort of a sense of what you're excited about, what you're looking forward to when it comes to voice, and what's next for Pandora in this space, maybe.
Yeah, so one of the main goals of Pandora Series XM is to provide a consistent voice experience across all interfaces. So whether it's in the car or connected devices or on the phone. So what that future looks like in building a unified service to remove surprises for the user, because they don't care that who is figuring out. We have to remove the burden of choice from the user. And so we're trying to figure out how to make it really seamless. That's one of the things. The other thing is, as I mentioned, building out experiences to build that connection in an online world that feels personal between the fan and the creator. That's another really interesting area. And in terms of user experiences, multimodal conversation, what is the right balance versus just play the damn thing and move out of my way sort of thing. So it's gonna take a lot of usage and experimentation to reach the optimal levels, and I'm optimistic that the more people get comfortable with using voice across any device, it doesn't have to be on Pandora, the more we will also benefit from it. So the overall pie is only going to get bigger. And I'm also really excited to see how monetization plays out in the space. Pandora does have voice ads, and I feel like people tend to side-eye ads, but it's really the bread and butter of the internet. Like that's how we all fund our products. And so, but playing a personalized ad that can talk to you is so different than just serving the same ad to every user. So that's also something that we're experimenting, looking into, to see how to create that trust with the user, so we can play good ads for them that will serve them. And yeah, that kind of wraps up all the stuff that we're thinking about for music.
I think that also wraps up our discussion nicely, because it looks like we have these two avenues to go down, basically, with very interactive experiences, maybe even going into VR, maybe talking to multiple assistants at the same time. And then sometimes you just want to get things done quickly and then have it go out of your way. And before we all go out of your way, I want to just, again, thank our panelists so much for joining us from 3 continents today to talk about the future of voice. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. Thanks so much again. And stay tuned for more. Follow us on protocol.com. We have our events there. And if you want to learn more about subjects like this, you can subscribe to my newsletter at protocol.com/newsletters and subscribe to Protocol Next up there. Thanks again. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.